Hey everybody, welcome back. We haven't done an interview in a while. Maybe it's because I haven't been out and about and I haven't met a lot of interesting people. But I went to an event in Phoenix at the end of November, and as it turned out, met quite a few interesting people. And one of the interesting people that I wanted to get to know better, and I figured you would too, is someone named Janet Williams, who I have asked to come and chat with us today. So, how are you, Janet?
I am great, Leslie. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
Well, I enjoyed chatting with you at this event, and I thought I'm going to find out more about what she has done in this industry and what she does today. So, Janet, give us a little bit, just let us know a little bit about yourself, how I ended up seeing you at a event in the professional beauty industry, and where you spend your time these days.
Well, a lot of the time that I spend work wise is right here in this office in my house, because probably just like millions of other people, I work primarily remote. But what I'm doing while I'm in this office is having conversations that matter with people at work. And I have a background in the professional beauty industry. So I'll talk a little bit about that first and then talk about what I'm currently doing and how that all connects, right? So I started working in the professional beauty industry, I guess, a little over 10 years ago. And I started with Aveda. I was the director of the Aveda Institute in Washington, D.C. And I did that for a number of years. And I'll tell you something, that experience showed me in a very real way how beauty does change people's lives, right? Because I learned so much about beauty and about the meaning, the real meaning of beauty from that experience. I also worked for an international hair franchise salon company, hair salon brand, franchise company, for a number of years in an education focused senior leadership role. And I met so many people in this industry from that experience. And there are so many great relationships that have continued as a result of having worked with that organization. And so when you met me at the beauty industry event, it was really because of that, because of so many of the people that are still very near to me, so close to me, and so valuable to me as colleagues from the past are now becoming colleagues and clients today. And so what I'm doing now is that I have a very strong background in this area, but I own a small consulting firm that focuses on cultural intelligence and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at work. And I'm talking to a lot of people in the beauty space. And I started working in this field of diversity, equity, and inclusion in 1998 when I was a consultant back then. And I did it for a number of years and had a lot of conversations in corporations, most of them focused around things that pertain to leadership and various forms of education. But I always wove in these elements around diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And so when I was looking at, Janet Williams 3.0 and decided to start my business up again, I said, this is the perfect match for me to really work back in this space that I always loved so much. And then to be able to marry that within the beauty industry is just a bonus.
Wow. So I think what you do is super interesting. And I think bringing it into the beauty industry, I think I told you at the event when I first, I come from healthcare. Everybody knows that my background's really in nursing. And in nursing, there is almost a requirement to have diversity and inclusion and stuff. I don't get to pick who comes into the emergency room. I don't get to pick who I
That's
work
right.
with. I mean, healthcare is, I think part of it is we study the body from the inside out. So we're less likely to be influenced by what we see on the outside. But that when I came to work in the professional beauty industry, I was really shocked by what I saw as a very segregated industry. And everybody accepted it. Like, oh, they do ethnic hair, or there was this divide. And particularly along the lines of color, that I was kind of like, wow, I've like never worked anywhere where this is so like everybody just agrees that only black people do black people's hair and only white people do white people's hair. And so I was kind of surprised by that. And, but, not being a stylist, I don't understand the differences that might actually occur between the way the hair works or doesn't work or that kind of thing. But you said something to me when we met and you said, well, I think everybody should be able to do everybody's hair. Right. I mean,
Oh, absolutely. So I'm not a stylist either, but I always used to tell students and guests that I play one on TV, right? Because in running a beauty institute, you certainly learn so much about hair and what it means and all of those things, and actually some techniques. I know just enough hair technique to be absolutely dangerous. You want to stay away from me in that regard. But so this whole piece around segregating stylists to only work on guests that match their demographic is absolutely ridiculous. And it's ridiculous on so many levels. Um, Anyone who is being trained as a professional in any industry should have the bandwidth, the knowledge, and the flexibility to work with whoever walks through the door. So I think that this mindset around only white stylists should do a white person's hair or only black stylists should do a black person's hair, that's an antiquated way of thinking. And I understand why there are some people who still believe that. Because in some spaces, that's the way it's always been. And a lot of us are comfortable living in that sort of space. But to move forward and to really be effective in this industry, whether you're doing hair, nails, skincare, any other type of personal service, being able to really touch and share your gifts with everyone is of paramount importance, right? It's really, and I think that the industry in so many ways is moving in that direction.
mhm,
There's certainly a lot of organizations that are pioneering this concept that, hair is hair. Now, is hair different? Hair is different, right? There are different textures of hair. There's certainly different historical perspectives in terms of how hair is styled, how it's worn, what it means to people. And it's important. That's where the cultural intelligence piece comes in. It's important that we all understand those things. But from a technique standpoint, any stylist should be trained and proficient in working with any guest, no matter what their hair looks like or what their hair texture is,
right,
or even worse, what their skin color is.
right.
That shouldn't make any difference whatsoever.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation not too long ago with what I did with one of the textbook manufacturers, and I was
Mhm.
editing a chapter, and I said, what really bothers me is we don't have any pictures of these skin disorders on people of color. Like I don't, and I know it looks different on somebody that's, I mean, not as pasty white as me. Obviously, it's easier to see it on me, but I'm afraid that somebody doesn't get diagnosed as quickly because it's not recognized, right? Because all that the training is done where it's really, really obvious. And they jumped right on it. They were like, you know what, you're right. And
Mhm.
I thought this is really, for me, it was an eye opening moment. I saw this weekend, Instagram gave awards to some of their, or TikTok gave awards to some of their biggest influencers. And one of them was a um, Black physician who spent all of his TikTok showing skin disorders. Here's what it looks like when your skin's this color, this color, this color, this color, so that nobody got left out of the, let's notice something and get someone to the doctor. So
That's
it,
right. And that's an example of it's not about political correctness, right? This
right.
is not what that is. This is a medical imperative that he's talking about. And for people that are practicing in our industry, it's so important to recognize that people think various situations might show up a little bit differently. And if you don't have any examples of that through your education, it makes sense that you're going to be a little bit intimidated by it, that you might miss certain important cues or clues that people are providing because you haven't been exposed to it. So I love that. That's a great story. And I love that that manufacturer was so responsive and recognizes
Yeah,
the
they got
importance.
right on it. They got with a dermatologist who said, "I can give you
Yeah,
those
that's
pictures." And I
great.
was like, "This is great because no matter what color you are, you want to be able to recognize something that you might see on somebody while you're, doing a service on them." So I've gotten you a little off track on the things that interest me, which happens occasionally on these interviews.
No
Something interests
worries.
me and I go down a road, but
Uh-huh.
I want to hear about how your business works, what your model is like. Give me either a story about a client or like your ideal client. Is it a school that calls you, a salon that calls you and says, "Hey, we need help"? And then what does that look like?
My ideal client is a business that is run by people who care about the experience of the people that are working with them. That's my ideal client. And as far as segmentation goes, that doesn't matter to me. I do have um, some incredible clients that are in the professional beauty industry space. And if I said their names or the names of their companies, you would immediately recognize them because they are iconic companies in the industry. But I also work with organizations that are outside of the industry. What I'm most concerned about for any client is that they want to know what's going on in their organization. And one of the things that we do very well at Progressive Discoveries is a service, it's kind of an entry level service called Pulse Check. And through that Pulse Check process, not we are having conversations that matter all throughout the organization, starting from for many of my clients, I really usually start with the board of directors and then move into conversations with the C-suite, then with the leadership teams at all levels, from supervisory all the way up through directors and vice presidents and chiefs. And then we talk to the people that are actually performing the work. So it doesn't matter if it's a school or if it's a manufacturer or if it's a salon company, that is not really important because people are people. What the criteria, again, that we are concerned about for our clients is that they're willing to take the leap to have that conversation and to really find out what people are experiencing while working with them as it pertains to cultural intelligence or cultural agility, if you will, which is the flexibility and the understanding about being able to move through various cultures and understanding that that differences show up because of those differences that exist in people, but also being willing to take a look at how people might be experiencing their work differently based on all types of identity indicators. So those identity indicators could be race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, any number of things. And those would be what we would call the most kind of obvious or primary traits of individuals. But then there are other diversity traits, if you will, that you can't necessarily see about people, but they inform who that individual is. So for organizations that are really interested in knowing what their employees are experiencing based on some of those factors, and also interested in creating more inclusive work environments, right? Also interested in fostering a stronger sense of belonging, which is not about fitting in. It really isn't. It's about fitting together. And I'll tell you a cute story about that and how that shows up for me in just a second. And also for organizations that are concerned about things that are related to equity, right? And equity having to do with recognizing that not everyone has the same experience. And how do we get people to the point where the playing field is leveled a little bit? And that's not necessarily related to conditions such as race. It could be related to any number of factors. It could be related to education, work experience, lived experience, age, all of those other indicators that I just talked about. So companies that are willing to take that look are companies that I want to talk to and enjoy speaking with. And my approach is around no shame and no blame, right? These conversations in some organizations are people have a perception that, having a conversation about any of this is going to be difficult, that they're going to be made to feel uncomfortable, that they're going to feel blame, that they're going to be accused of something. And I say, absolutely not. Time out on that type of behavior. That's not productive for anyone. I'm concerned about having important conversations in a way that is mindful and respectful and inclusive of everyone, because it takes everyone in the organization to make the wheels turn. And it's not just about isolating any one group about anything. All of us contribute to what we're living with at work every single day. And let's talk about it, but we're going to talk about it in very respectful ways. We're going to talk about it in ways that are not creating shame or blame for anyone, and that are ways that we can move the entire organization forward together. The other, and I know this is a long-winded answer, I'm sorry, but the other piece that I'm also concerned about as it pertains to organizations is that not only do they want to take a look at who they are today, but they have a sense of who they want to be tomorrow, whether tomorrow is 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, however long from now it is. They have a sense of what they want that to look like, what their legacy should be, and how they want to show up in the world for their employees, but also for the other important stakeholders that orbit around and into their business. So those are the folks that I'm interested in working with.
Okay, so I have a question for you then.
Yeah.
My mind's always working, thinking about other like ways something could be. So is this a scalable approach to the extent that if I were, let's say, a salon owner and I wanted, let's say I only have, not only, I have like 10 chairs, let's say, in my salon, and maybe I have a couple locations in the city that I'm in. I don't have a C-suite. I don't have a board of directors. I just have me owning these 3 or 4 salons.
Sure.
Could it be a service that would be, I could see it being valuable in terms of not just how the people that work for me experience it, but how my consumer experiences it, like
Oh,
how
absolutely.
how it works for them to come in. Until I literally was just talking to you, I never occurred to me, and this might just show how I've lived my life, right? It never occurred to me that I would have to think before I called a salon to see if they would do my hair, right? Like if they would be able to do my hair or they would feel comfortable doing my hair. And I don't want anyone to feel like that, right? And
Right.
so, and I just like had that moment of acknowledgement that maybe if I had a different kind of hair, I would have to call and say, do you do this kind of hair? And I've never actually thought about that, right?
Well, and
So I'm
that's
talking
the
about
experience.
the
I'm familiar
salon
with that.
level. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that experience. And to answer your question about how I would be able to add value within a salon environment, I mean, there's so many ways. I have lots of experience in working with salon owners through, all types of lived and professional experiences, and helping salon owners to not only train their people, but to help them grow their businesses, inside and outside of this conversation about DEIB. So yes, I certainly would be able to work with salon owners to help them assess where they are internally, and also look at what's happening externally. What's the guest experience looking like?
Right.
And the next part, so that pulse checks piece is sort of the entry point that I have with any client, with any organization. And from there, there's so much rich data that we're able to collect through that process of just talking with people, having conversations with folks, doing an electronic survey. Lots of our clients partake in that exercise of doing an electronic survey, which gives you so much rich information and data about what people are experiencing. And from that, then the next piece is around strategy, creating those strategies that are actionable, not these fluffy things that have to do with, sitting around the campfire, singing Kumbaya and making everyone feel that they belong, but really putting into action various behaviors and systems and ways of communicating that result in real change for the organization that's going to have a positive impact for employees, for leaders, for customers, and for other stakeholders.
Excellent. Well, you did say you were going to tell us a funny story, but real quick before you do that, have you found that the years since 2020, since the pandemic and all that has occurred, all the unrest across the country, with all of us being stuck in our houses, and then there was all these things going on around us, has your job been easier or harder? And has it been easier to get people interested in it? I would assume the conversation is much more in the forefront than it was maybe even 2 or 3 years ago. And maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're not wrong. So the conversation is a lot more in the forefront. So in some respects, it's been easier for me, but it's not, I mean, I don't know. It's these conversations are not necessarily so easy because they can be very intense. But I find, especially with newer clients that I'm working with, that we always have to start with a clarifying conversation, right? Because what ends up happening is that people are conflating all of these things that are happening. So, there's social unrest that's going on. Um, there's a pandemic, there's climate change, there's all of these things that are happening that's created this whirlwind that we're all living in today. So a lot of the times when people are initially contacting me, they're talking about, well, the murder of George Floyd happened and this happened and that happened. And because of that, I want to take a look at this in my organization. One of the first conversations that I have to have is around the distinction between issues that pertain to social justice and the types of work that I do. Social justice is hugely important. It's something that is very close to me and that I care very much about. However, in my professional life, in my practice, what I want to talk to organizations about is what you can do in your company to improve or to highlight the experience that your employees are having and that everyone in your company is having, so that you can look at, what do I want my legacy to be around this, and then live into that. So I am not really talking to organizations so much about social justice because, frankly, that's such a huge issue that most organizations cannot really impact in any way. But what they can impact is what happens to the people who work with them every single day. And I'm not talking about just any
Yeah.
one group of people, but all the people that work within a particular organization. And so that's where our focus is. So I would say that my job is not necessarily harder. It's more nuanced, I guess, and a little bit more complex because we're having to jump through that hurdle first because people are still so incensed about all of the things that have occurred over the last 2 years.
I also think, when you mentioned all the things that are putting us in the whirlwind, as you put it, which is a perfect way to put it, you think about things like the pandemic and climate change and things that are just things, right? That I don't have any personal control over. Like by myself, I can't control
Right.
those things. And, they always say I can't control what someone else does. I can just control how I react to it. And
That's
I
right.
think that what you're saying, what your goal still is let's leave those big things that we can't individually or even as a company maybe control. Let's leave them to the side. We can all be a part of that. But what we can control is how we work together internally, how we are perceived in our community. You're putting the control, you're giving the control to them and the one thing they still have control over, right? And one of the
Right.
few things we still have control over that makes us have angst, right?
That's right. And we also have a lot of control over a level of self-awareness. And that's one of my starting off points. Really understand, where are you? Where do you, what's your position in all of this? How are you communicating with people? How do you really feel about what's happening here? If we can get solid around that, I think that can solve so many problems within organizations, just increasing the level of awareness that everyone has, and then working within those parameters to help move the organization forward.
Well, I have certainly enjoyed talking to you. I know you said you had a funny story you wanted to tell us, and I always try to leave the last little bit for whoever I'm interviewing, to if there's something we didn't cover that you really want to say, or if you even just want to tell anybody that you think might be in our audience how you might fit in their world. When we do post all these up, we post all your contact information and people can ask questions and such. But I like to leave
Mhm.
the last few minutes just to you. Tell us your funny story if you want, or not, whichever.
Well, I wasn't going to really tell. It's not really a funny story. It's just kind of a funny thing about me, as I made a mention about belonging and how belonging really isn't about fitting in, right? That it's about people being able to fit together. And what's, I guess, not necessarily haha funny about this, but it's kind of interesting, is that one of the things that I love about this industry, about the beauty industry in total, is that there are so many people in this industry who are the creatives, who are different, who always stood out, who never really felt as if they belong. And there's this, and I was that person, and I still am in a lot of ways that person. So I'm not really that concerned about fitting in. I don't really need to fit in. But what I am concerned about in a work environment is making sure that I can fit together with other people that are in the organization. And I think that that's a wonderful goal for anyone who's a part of this industry, is looking at what does it take for us to be able to fit together, right? So there's this famous postcard, and the postcard has four little girls who are all ballerinas, and they all, so three of the four have their legs up on the ballet bar, and they are, following the instructions of the teacher. And then there's the fourth girl who's turned herself completely upside down, and she's hanging by her ankles off the bar, right? Doing the complete opposite of what everybody else is doing. So that was me. I was that little girl. And I think that so many people in this industry are that little girl, whether they are a girl or a guy, or gender nonconforming, or whoever they might be. There's so many of us in this industry who fit into that category. And that's what I want to help organizations get to the heart of. Let's be able to touch and reach those people and make sure that there's a place for everyone in the organization. That's what belonging is about. One last thing, I guess what I would love for your audience to know is that in we're in really competitive times in any type of business that we're running, especially within this space. So, being able to dig into what's important to your teams, your people, whether you're a small organization or a large one, really helps you to unlock the door to so many concerns that are prevalent for people at work today. And they have to do with things like turnover and burnout and indifference and customer dissatisfaction. Once you start, just taking those steps towards really wanting to listen to what people are experiencing and what they have to say, even if it's a little uncomfortable at first, people respond to that. And so one story that I would love to tell is that there's an organization with whom I work, and I've been working with this organization for about a year now. It's a big organization. And there was a manager with that company that I interviewed through the initial pulse check process. And that manager expressed a lot of dissatisfaction, so much so that she says, I'm really thinking about leaving. I've had enough. No, and there were a number of concerns that manager had. Through the work that we've been able to do, and we've been working again with this organization for a little over a year now, that manager is now the person who is leading the charge on all of these initiatives, who's coming to me to say, hey, I don't think you really talk to all the people in my department that you need to, because I'm still hearing this, that, and the other thing. We need to take another look at this. And is really engaged at a level that I don't think that she ever has been. And it all started from us being able to have a conversation with her, and then to share some of those concerns throughout the organization. And the organization started responding to those things, and it turned that experience for that manager around. And that's the juice right there, right? And that is when the juice is definitely worth the squeeze. So that's what I would say,
Well,
that
I
people
mean,
should walk away with.
that is great. I mean, and you know
Mhm.
what? The little ballerinas, I was the one putting my leg up on the thing, but, the ballerinas putting their leg up on there, following the rules. I'm a natural born rule follower. Um, that part of me, um, as I've gotten older, has been much more open to the idea of everybody who does it every single way. And if you can open people's eyes, 20 years before they're my age, all the better. So we really appreciate you taking the time today. I know things are busy right before the holidays, but hopefully we'll get some good questions, which will feed back to you. Everybody who listens to these knows that they can send in their questions and we'll get them to you. And I really, really just appreciate your time and thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.